men and women consistently claimed that the election was rigged or that somehow it had been conducted fraudulently, with no evidence of that and an endless series of lost court cases that frustrated their attempts to overturn Biden's win.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
On January 20, 2021, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th President of the United States, with the twin jobs of reviving the economy and defeating the virus. It's an unenviable task. In December, the figures in the United States were worse than at any time in the year, with daily death tolls worse than Pearl Harbor, the Civil War, and September 11. Not that the US was alone, though. Most countries failed to deal successfully with the pandemic, with many pinning their hopes on a vaccine to stem the overwhelming tide. There were vaccines rolled out in Russia and in China, but most of the focus was on the Pfizer vaccine, which the first patients in the UK received in mid-December. And the UK needed it. From a low of 4 new cases per day in July, it surged to more than 33,000 in November and was at more than 20,000 new cases a day when the vaccine was finally rolled out.
A few days ago, Maggie Keenan was just an ordinary 90-year-old. But in the space of a few seconds, she made history, becoming the first person to receive the Pfizer jab outside of a clinical trial.
I couldn't believe it, but I'm happy it's happened. Hopefully it'll help other people to come along and do as I did, try and do the best to get rid of this terrible thing.
Politics was dominated by the decisions our leaders made in the best interests of keeping their citizens safe. Mostly, despite the impositions on our daily lives, we went along with these decisions, and that was reflected in election results. In New Zealand, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was returned with an absolute majority. In Queensland, Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk was returned to government, as were Chief Ministers Andrew Barr in the ACT and Michael Gunner in the Northern Territory. In New South Wales, though, Premier Gladys Berejiklian had other things to deal with. Although she was generally praised for how the state had dealt with the coronavirus, apart from the Ruby Princess debacle, it was the Premier's personal life that came under scrutiny, following revelations that she'd been in a long-term relationship with disgraced former MP Daryl Maguire.
A Premier under pressure.
Ms Berejiklian, you should answer the question.
I am answering the question.
You should answer it directly.
Certainly. Gladys Berejiklian has been hauled before the Independent Commission Against Corruption and forced to reveal a secret relationship with a controversial former MP.
Ms Berejiklian, have you ever been in a close personal relationship with Mr Maguire?
Yeah, I would like to say at the outset that Mr Maguire was a colleague of 15 years. He was someone that I trusted. He was a trusted colleague.
Daryl Maguire was the member for Wagga Wagga in the New South Wales Parliament until 2018, when he quit following accusations of improper conduct. He's accused of attempting to broker property deals and seek commission on behalf of a Chinese developer. In her evidence today, the Premier revealed a jaw-dropping timeline, confirming a relationship had been going on behind closed doors for years.
It was an unexpected and curious footnote to a bizarre year, and one that, like just about everything else in 2020, seems to have been totally unpredictable. What was predictable was the results in the major football codes. The Melbourne Storm won the NRL, defeating a spirited Penrith Panthers team that had won 18 matches in a row going into the grand final.
Melbourne deserve it, by far and away the better side. They scored the first 26 and Penrith scores the last 20. Melbourne 26, Penrith 20. The celebrations are on out there, and that's a great victory for them. It's an amazing season, but the way that they've had to endure this season away from home for 4 months is quite something.
In the AFL, it was business as usual too, despite the grand final being played in Brisbane, outside Melbourne for the first time ever. Richmond won its third title in 4 years, sending out the retiring great, Geelong's Gary Ablett Jr. with a loss.
12-9-81 leads 7-8-50. With only seconds remaining in the grand final. In a year where nothing has been normal, one thing stays the same. The Tigers are still the best team in the land. 3 flags in 4 years for Richmond. An historic achievement on an historic night.
But those grand finals were distractions. Australia was forced to deal with other, more serious matters as the year ended. The first came at Doha Airport, when female passengers on board 10 Qatar Airways jets were removed from the planes and illegally and humiliatingly searched by local officials trying to find the mother of a baby left in one of the airport toilets. It was an outrageous and appalling violation of the rights of these women, and, although an apology was later issued, that in no way made up for the assault and the loss of dignity to which the victims were subjected.
The Australian government is using increasingly strong language to describe events that took place several weeks ago at Doha Airport.
This is a grossly disturbing, offensive, concerning set of events.
Foreign Minister Maurice Payne says the federal government has registered its serious concerns with Qatari authorities here and in Doha.
It is not something I have ever heard of occurring in my life. In any context, we have made our views very clear to the Qatari authorities on this matter.
Another much bigger issue that dominated the news at the end of the year and will have ongoing consequences for Australia and our armed forces was a report into the behaviour of our SAS and Special Forces units in Afghanistan. The Brereton report detailed, without naming the soldiers involved, 39 cases of murder of Afghan prisoners and civilians by 25 Australian frontline personnel. Most of these war crimes took place in 2011 and 2012, although some dated back to 2009. The report made grim reading for those who have long celebrated this country's military history. The report detailed the illegal planting of weapons on Afghans, which was then used to justify the Australians' murderous actions, and the practice known as blooding, whereby soldiers would get their first kill in the field, was often of an unarmed or innocent man. The report found that NCOs, corporals and sergeants were responsible for giving these orders, and that senior officers probably had no knowledge of what went on. But a deeper inquiry, to be held next year, will no doubt tell us more about this disgraceful chapter in the War on Terror. And Australians will hopefully learn the truth about how some soldiers who wear this country's name on their army uniform behave when they think that they're above the law. General Angus Campbell, Chief of the Defence Force, spoke at the release of the report and offered a full apology to the people of Afghanistan.
To the people of Afghanistan, on behalf of the Australian Defence Force, I sincerely and unreservedly apologise for any wrongdoing by Australian soldiers. Such alleged behaviour profoundly disrespected the trust placed in us by the Afghan people, who had asked us to their country to help them.
The behaviour of these soldiers also contributed to a diplomatic incident between Australia and China. The coronavirus and Australia's demand that there be an investigation into its origins had led to a fracturing in the trade and diplomatic relationship between the two countries. And a tweet from China with a faked picture of an Australian soldier killing a child made things far, far worse.
The image had barely been up for an hour before the chorus of condemnation commenced, and the Prime Minister was the first to speak.
It is utterly outrageous, and it cannot be justified on any basis whatsoever. The Chinese government should be totally ashamed.
The image is photoshopped. It shows an Australian soldier holding a bloodied knife to the throat of an Afghan child. The child's face is frozen in a terrified grimace underneath a blue cloth. Underneath that, there's a caption reading, "Don't be afraid, we're coming to bring you peace." Scott Morrison's response was forceful.
Australia is seeking an apology from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, from the Chinese government, for this outrageous post.
It was just one more awful thing in a year when Australian manufacturers and primary producers needed all the help they could get in exporting to our biggest market.
Late last week, massive tariffs were slapped on Australian wine after months of Chinese trade sanctions and controls being imposed on products ranging from timber to rock lobsters.
For most of us, 2020 was a year unlike any other. It was a year that not even James Bond could cope with, because after battling foes on screen for more than 60 years, there was one that he couldn't defeat. COVID-19 meant that the release date for the latest Bond movie, unfortunately titled No Time to Die, was bumped from April to November and then to some unknown date next year. 2020 was a leap year too, so on top of everything we had to put up with an extra day of COVID misery. Our daily lives and just about everything we hold dear and take for granted have changed, possibly forever. And then, just to show that there was still a sting in the tail of COVID-19 at the end of 2020, an outbreak on Sydney's northern beaches, which soon spread to other parts of the city, meant that lockdowns, business closures, border closures and other restrictions returned just in time for Christmas and the New Year. Also at the end of the year, and with just a week to go before a deal had to be made, it seems as though the UK and Europe finally came up with some sort of deal to allow Brexit to finally go ahead.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says reaching the agreement is tinged with regret.
I know this is a difficult day for some, and to our friends in the United Kingdom, I want to say, parting is such sweet sorrow.
For those who lived through 2020, we should take the time to mourn those that we lost this year. But we should also look ahead to a better 2021. And on this day next year, hopefully, we'll all be able to celebrate happier times. 2020, the year in review, was dedicated to the late John Spence. The music production was by Jake Round. Archive material was from Michael Osmond, Sabrina Lipovich, Lisa Chidlow and Natalia Lopez Guzman. 2020, the year in review, was written, produced and presented by Rod Quinn. And on this New Year's Eve, may I wish you a very happy new year for 2021.
ABC News with Satyam Weinstein. Victoria will close its border to all of New South Wales on midnight on New Year's Day following 8 community cases of COVID-19 linked to Greater Sydney's coronavirus outbreak. 5 locally acquired cases were recorded today, and the list of the high-risk exposure sites has been expanded. Over 70 close contacts of cases are self-isolating. Victoria's COVID-19 response commander Jerome Weimer says anyone who gets back before the closure must get tested and isolate.
For any Victorians travelling from the green zone tomorrow or travelling today from Wollongong and Blue Mountains, you need to get home, get tested and isolate for 14 days.
10 new cases of coronavirus have been recorded in New South Wales. 5 are linked to the Avalon cluster, 3 to the Croydon cluster and 1 to a quarantined transport worker. The other case remains under investigation. The New South Wales opposition says the third cricket test should go ahead in Sydney, but without any spectators. The decision to continue with the test at the SCG was made before a significant rise in COVID cases in Sydney. Shadow Health Minister Ryan Park says even with a reduced spectator capacity, there's still a high risk of community transmission.
We don't believe that anyone should be attending the cricket ground and the test should be played, but it should be watched by people at home, continue to be televised. People can still watch it at the SCG through their television, but people shouldn't be attending, not when we have clusters.
Western Australia has closed its border to people coming from Victoria after the re-emergence of locally acquired cases of COVID-19 there. People will no longer be able to enter WA unless they're an exempt traveller. Victoria's been classified as a very low-risk state because there hadn't been any community transmission for 28 days, but it's now been reclassified as a medium-low-risk state, meaning new restrictions apply from 12:01am tonight. Acting Premier and the Health Minister, Roger Cook, says the government realises this will cause inconvenience for West Australians who went to Victoria for Christmas and need to return home.
The President of the United States has expressed his support for the $2,000.
U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi is accusing Senate Republicans of obstructing A push for a bigger COVID-19 relief check for Americans. The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is proposing an alternative approach of loading up the bill with other White House priorities that appear destined to fail. Speaker Pelosi, who's a Democrat, says Republicans in the Senate seem to have an endless tolerance for other people's suffering.
The President of the United States has expressed his support for the $2,000. The Democrats and Republicans in the House have passed that legislation. Who is holding up that distribution to the American people? Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans.
A Jakarta-based security analyst says a suspected Chinese drone discovered in a crucial maritime route that leads towards Australia is likely to have been mapping future submarine routes. Indonesian military officials are examining the unmanned underwater vehicle, which was found just before Christmas near Selayar Island in South Sulawesi province. Indonesian security writer Muhammad Fauzan says it's not the first time Chinese drones have been found in the region.
Are these drones part of any illegal survey activity or even some sort of espionage or intelligence gathering operation towards Indonesia?
The US says it's imposing new trade tariffs on France and Germany just 3 weeks after the beginning of a new administration there. The BBC's Jonathan Joseph reports.
With less than 3 weeks still in office, the Trump administration has once again turned to tariffs. New import taxes are being imposed on non-sparkling wines, as well as brandies and aircraft manufacturing parts from France and Germany. The US says it's doing so because the European Union unfairly used figures from during the coronavirus pandemic to calculate which products it would impose tariffs on. It also unfairly excluded UK trade. This means more US products were hit than would otherwise have been the case.
Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai has had his bail revoked after prosecutors succeeded in asking the city's highest court to send him back into detention. Lai was granted bail on the 23rd, but after 3 weeks in custody on charges of fraud and endangering national security. His appeal hearing is due on the 1st of February. Jimmy Lai is one of the best-known pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong. This is ABC News.
3, 2, 1, here she comes! Woo!
From bush time at Wood 40.
This is New Year's Eve
With Sarah Howes on ABC Radio.
Hello, Wood 40! Yes, welcome to Wood 40. Now, usually at this time of year where I'm standing right now on Jinnaburra country, it would be bustling, shoulder to shoulder with over 130,000 people. A festival site transformed into a small city for a week in this luscious green valley just north of Brisbane. Now, usually this would be Woodford Folk Festival. But it's 2020, so we're all having to do things differently, and Woodfordia is no different. Instead of a small city, it's a friendly village. And there's still music, there's still workshops, there's art, and there's you, and there's me. So I'd really like to welcome you in tonight to Bush Time. It's an intimate, relaxed escape from the world, a beautiful camping experience under the stars, and really the perfect place for us to just breathe out and welcome in the new year. So thank you so much for joining me near and far on ABC Radio tonight. We have a spectacular lineup of musicians for you across the next hour, including the award-winning songstress Katie Noonan, and lots of laughter for good measure as well. So let's kick it off. Your new year from Bush Time at Woodfordia with live music direct from the patio. Please put your hands together for Sahara Beck.
Times have shown me better than before, but you've always wanted more. Ooh, these eyes have laid upon such pretty things, but you own my heartstrings. My mind falls in love with memories, all that never belonged to me. Ooh, mother, mother, I'm sorry that I lied.